I still remember that night, June 26, 1977, like it's carved into my mind. Market Square Arena, Indianapolis, 18,000 people, each of them ready to see a man who had given them more than just music. They came to see Elvis Presley. But that night was different. Even before he stepped on stage, you could feel it in the air. It wasn't excitement, not really. It was something heavier. The kind of hush that settles when people sense they're about to witness the end of something, even if they don't know it yet. I was there, working backstage, close enough to see the man behind the myth. Elvis looked tired. Not the kind of tired you sleep off, but the kind that seeps into your bones. He moved slower, smiled softer. Still, when he walked past, everyone straightened up. He had that presence. Even worn down, he was still Elvis Presley. "Evening, fellas," he said. Voice gentle, southern, polite as ever. He looked at each of us, really looked. "Thank you for everything, boys. For the music." At the time, we laughed it off. Thought he was just in one of his sentimental moods, but now I think maybe he knew. When the lights went down at 8:30, the arena erupted, and for a second, he seemed to come alive again. The spotlight hit that white jumpsuit, and the rhinestones scattered light like 1,000 tiny stars. He smiled, nodded to the band, and the music began. But there was something different in the way he moved. Slower, almost careful. He forgot a line or two, stopped once to catch his breath. Some folks in the front row noticed. Others didn't. They just screamed his name like always. Then came that moment, the one none of us will ever forget. Elvis walked toward the piano at center stage, not with swagger, but with the grace of a man walking towards something sacred. "I want to do something from the heart tonight," he said into the mic. The crowd went quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. He sat down, hands trembling just a little, and began to play the opening chords of Unchained Melody. It wasn't on the set list. Nobody expected it. But as soon as he started to sing, everyone knew this was different. His voice was raw, almost breaking, but somehow more powerful than ever. It wasn't the voice of a superstar. It was the voice of a man trying to hold on to something. Maybe love. Maybe life itself. "Are you still mine?" he sang, and it sounded less like a lyric and more like a question he was asking the world. People around me had tears in their eyes. Even the sound crew, hard men, road-worn and tired, stood still. Halfway through the song, he looked up. His eyes were wet, reflecting the stage lights. He wasn't just performing anymore. He was saying goodbye to the crowd, to the music, to everything. When he reached the final lines, "I need your love. Godspeed your love to me." His voice cracked on the word love, and I swear for a moment, the whole arena felt it. That shiver that tells you you're witnessing something holy. When the song ended, he just sat there, didn't move, didn't smile, just breathed. 18,000 people were dead silent. And then, after what felt like forever, he whispered, "Thank you." Not the kind of thank you he gave at every show, and this one was different, softer, final. Then he stood up, slow and steady, walked to the front of the stage, and put his hand over his heart. He didn't bow, didn't wave. Just looked out at the faces in front of him, thousands of strangers who'd loved him for 20 years, and for the first time in all the years I'd seen him, I think he looked at them not as fans, but as family. He whispered, "You've been the best audience a man could ask for." And that was it, no fireworks. No encore, just the sound of a piano still echoing in the dark. I saw him as he left the stage, shoulders slumped, face pale, eyes soft but distant. He smiled at me one last time and said, "We gave him a good one tonight, didn't we?" I nodded, but inside I think both of us knew. This wasn't just another show. That night Elvis didn't perform for fame. He didn't sing for applause. He sang to let go, and maybe to say goodbye. After the concert ended that night, there was a strange kind of silence backstage. Not the usual buzz, not the rush of roadies and laughter, just quiet. Elvis had gone straight to his dressing room. Normally there'd be people, friends, security, hangers-on, all crowding around, talking, joking, bringing him water or towels. But this time nobody moved. Nobody wanted to break whatever that moment was. When I finally went in, he was sitting alone. The mirror lights were still on, soft and yellow, reflecting off the sequins of his white jumpsuit. He was just staring at his hands. For a man who had owned every stage he'd ever walked on, He suddenly looked small and not defeated, just finished. "You all right, E?" I asked. He smiled a little. "Yeah, I'm fine, son. Just tired. Real tired." His voice had that slow southern rhythm, but the strength was fading out of it. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and said something I'll never forget. "You know, I think I sang that one right tonight." It took me a second to realize he meant Unchained Melody. He said it like it mattered, like that song had been waiting for him all along. When the crew came in to pack up, he stood up slowly, like every muscle had to remember what to do. Someone tried to hand him a bottle of water. He waved it off. "I'm good, honey. Save it for the road." He hugged each of us before leaving, not quick, casual hugs, long ones, like a man memorizing something he knew he'd never get back. Later that night, after the trucks had rolled out and the arena was dark again, I walked across the empty stage. The lights were gone, the seats were empty. But I could still hear him, that voice echoing through the rafters. "I need your love. Godspeed your love to me." It didn't sound like a performance anymore, it sounded like a prayer. When he left Indianapolis, I heard he went straight back to Graceland. And for weeks after, people said he was different, peaceful but distant. He'd sit at his piano late at night, sometimes playing that same song over and over again. Neighbors could hear it through the windows, the same melody, drifting through the Memphis air like a ghost. A friend of his told me Elvis would play until dawn, sometimes without saying a word. Unchained Melody, My Way, old gospel hymns, songs that meant something only he could explain. One night, someone asked him why he kept playing that one song. He smiled and said, "Because it feels like talking to God," without having to explain myself. That hit me hard when I heard it. Maybe all those years, all those shows, he'd been searching for that. A place where the music didn't have to be perfect, just honest. I remember a few days after the concert, his bodyguard Red called me. Said Elvis had been quiet lately. "He's got that faraway look again," Red told me. "Like he's here, but not really." We all thought it was just exhaustion. The man had carried the weight of the world for 20 years. Fame, expectations, money, heartbreak, and it all adds up. But looking back now, I think he'd already started to let go, not in a sad way, in a peaceful one. There was a tape from that last show, one that a fan had secretly recorded. When I finally heard it, years later, I sat alone in my living room, lights off, and listened, every note, every breath, every crack in his voice. It was all there, you could feel him in it. Not as a star, not as an icon, but as a man. When the song ended, I realized my hands were shaking. It wasn't because of sadness, it was because I understood. Elvis wasn't saying goodbye that night. He was saying, "Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. Thank you for loving him when he couldn't love himself." The papers later called it his final performance, but to me, it was something else. It was the moment he stopped performing and started speaking, through the only language he ever trusted, music. And when the lights went out in that arena, I swear I could still hear his voice echoing in the dark, not fading, not ending, just finding its way home. After Indianapolis, the world went on as if nothing had changed. Concert dates were still on the books, interviews were still scheduled, and the papers wrote about another great Elvis show. But for those of us who knew him, something had shifted. When Elvis came home to Graceland, it was different this time. The gates closed, and the noise of the world stayed outside. Inside it was quiet, peaceful, almost too peaceful. He didn't throw parties anymore. Didn't call people up at 3 in the morning to sing gospel songs like he used to. He spent most nights at the piano in the den, the one by the stained glass peacocks. Sometimes Lisa Marie would wander in, half asleep, and sit beside him. He'd smile, "Keep playing softly." She said later the house always smelled of coffee and rain back then, like the world was holding its breath. I went down to see him once that July. It was late, humid, the air thick with that Memphis heat. He opened the door himself, barefoot, hair a little messy. Not the king, just a man at home. "Hey, man," he said with that slow grin. "You thirsty?" We sat in the kitchen. He made coffee, instant, strong. He talked a little, but mostly he just stared out the window. Every now and then he'd hum something, a melody, a line. Then, quietly, he said, "You know, sometimes the songs come back before the people do." I didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't being poetic, He meant it. That night he asked if I wanted to hear something. We went to the piano, and he started playing Unchained Melody again, same way he did in Indianapolis, slow, trembling alive, only this time there was no crowd. No lights, just him, the music, and that old chandelier swaying a little in the air conditioning. He stopped halfway through and looked up at me. "You ever notice," he said, "how a song can outlive the man who wrote it?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He smiled faintly. "Good. That's the way it should be." He played for another hour after that. Hymns, old blues numbers, a bit of My Way. He looked lighter when he played, like each note peeled away a little of the weight he'd been carrying. At one point, he said, "They always ask me what I'll do when I retire, but how do you retire from feeling?" There wasn't an answer to that. The next few weeks were strange. Friends came and went, read. Charlie, the guys. They said he was calm, sometimes even joyful. He'd walk around the garden, humming softly to himself, feeding the horses, talking to Lisa about dreams, but there was a distance in his eyes, a kind of stillness, as if he was halfway somewhere else. One night, Fred called me from Graceland. "He's been at the piano since midnight," he said. "I think he's trying to find something in those keys. Maybe peace." I drove down 2 days later, but I didn't go in. I just parked outside the gates and listened. The house lights were on, soft and golden, and faintly, through the night air I heard it. The melody. Drifting, Unchained Melody. That song again, played slower now, gentler, like a whisper. And maybe it sounds crazy, but I swear I could hear two voices, his and something beyond him, meeting somewhere between the keys and the sky. The next morning, I got a call from one of the staff. "He's sleeping late," she said. "He was up all night playing. Said he finally got it right." I didn't know what that meant. Still don't. But I like to think that when he said right, he didn't mean the notes, he meant the feeling. He'd found the peace he'd been chasing his whole life. Not in fame, not in applause, but in that one final song. For 52 days after Indianapolis, the world still had Elvis Presley. But those of us who saw him then, we knew the king was already walking toward a quieter stage, not away from the music, but back into it, back to where it all began. A boy from Tupelo, a gospel tune, a prayer carried on a melody. And if you listen close enough sometimes on a quiet Memphis night, you can still hear him at that piano, playing the same song over and over until the dawn breaks. It was August 15th, 1977, a Monday. Memphis was heavy that night, the kind of southern heat that sits on your chest and makes every breath slow. I'd been meaning to call him all week. Didn't. Something in me thought, he's probably resting. Let him be. But around 9 that evening, the phone rang. It was Charlie. His voice was soft, tired. "He's up again," he said. "Been at the piano for hours. You can hear him from the yard." I drove over to Graceland. The gates were lit, the two silhouettes of Elvis and his guitar glowing gold against the dark. I parked outside and just listened. Through the night air came the sound of the piano, faint, distant, steady, that same melody again. Unchained Melody. I didn't go in, didn't want to break the spell. Instead, I sat on the hood of my car, watching. The windows flicker with warm light as the notes drifted into the night. There was something in his playing that night, slower, almost tender, like a man talking to someone who couldn't answer. Later, Charlie told me Elvis had played until almost 3 in the morning. He said to him before heading upstairs, "Charlie, I'm okay now." I got it right tonight. Charlie said he smiled when he said it, that gentle, lopsided smile he always had when something inside him settled. He went upstairs to his bedroom, the one with the blue drapes and the faint hum of the air conditioner. Lisa Marie was asleep down the hall. Ginger was reading. Elvis stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her quietly, then said, "I'll be down in a bit. Don't wait up, honey." Those were the last words anyone heard him say. Now, I've thought about that night more times than I can count. People like to make it tragic. The king alone in his mansion. But that's not what it was. I think it was peaceful. I think he finally found the quiet he'd been chasing his whole life. The next morning, I got the call, Charlie's voice again, only this time. It was shaking. He didn't have to say the words. I knew. I drove straight to Graceland. The gates were open. Reporters were already starting to gather outside. Flashes going off, voices echoing. But inside the house, everything was still. The air was heavy, not with sorrow, but with disbelief. They say when someone great passes, the world feels it, like the air shifts just a little. That morning, it did. The radio stations stopped. People cried in cars, even the sky over. Memphis looked dimmer somehow. I walked into the music room later that day. The piano lid was still open. A half-empty glass of water sat beside it, and on the music stand, one sheet of paper, handwritten with 2 words at the top, Unchained Melody. I sat there for a long time, didn't play, didn't move, just stared at those words, thinking about the way he played it, the way he felt it. He used to say, "You can fake a smile, you can fake fame, but you can't fake a song." I didn't understand what he meant until that day, after the funeral. They closed the piano for a while. No one touched it, but sometimes late at night, people who worked the night shift at Graceland swore they could hear faint music coming from the den. Soft, distant, like a song caught between this world and the next. And maybe that's the truth of it. Elvis didn't leave that night. He just went where the music was going. Back into the melody. Back into the silence he'd been searching for. Years later, when they placed that piano in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I went to see it. There was a plaque beneath it that read, "The piano where Elvis Presley performed his final song." But I don't think that's right. He didn't perform that song, he became it. Standing there, I realized something. That night, the king didn't die on a stage or in a mansion. He simply turned back into what he'd always been, a boy from Tupelo who loved a song more than anything in this world. And if you listen close enough, when the rain falls on Beale Street, or when a jukebox hums in an empty diner at midnight, you can still hear him, that voice, that prayer, that promise he never really left, he just kept singing. Somewhere the music never ends. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. The world moved on, new songs, new faces, new kings. But somehow, Elvis never really left. You still hear him everywhere, not just on old records or radios, but in the way people talk, the way they dream, the way they remember. It's strange. Decades later, people still ask me what it was like to be there, to see him, to hear him that last night. And I always tell them the same thing. It wasn't a concert. It was a confession. After he was gone, Graceland turned into a shrine. Tourists came from all over the world. They took pictures by the gate, left flowers, letters, even old vinyl records, and every single one of them said the same thing. He made me feel something. That's what real music does, and it makes you feel something true. And that was Elvis. Even when the fame and chaos tried to bury the man, the music never lied. It carried his heart, raw, cracked, beautiful. A few years after he passed, I visited Graceland again. They'd opened the house for tours, but the air still felt private. Like you were walking through someone's dream. I stood in front of that white piano, the same one from that night. The lid was open. The keys slightly yellowed from time. They said no one played it anymore. But as I stood there, I swear I heard something, a faint note, maybe a vibration, maybe my mind playing tricks, but it sounded like Unchained Melody. Maybe it was the air conditioner, maybe it was memory, or maybe songs never really die. Sometimes when I drive down Beale Street, I think about him, not the legend. The man, the one who drank black coffee, laughed too loud, gave away Cadillacs like candy, and sat up all night searching for the perfect chord. The man who could make you believe that love was still worth singing about. And the truth is, he was never chasing fame. He was chasing connection. That moment when a stranger in the crowd closed their eyes and felt what he felt. That was his church. That was his salvation. You know, I've worked with a lot of musicians since then. Some brilliant, some reckless, some lost. But I've never seen anyone give themselves to music the way he did. He didn't just perform it, he lived it. Until it burned through him. Until all that was left was the song itself. Sometimes, when people talk about Elvis, they only remember the glitter, the jumpsuits, the headlines. They forget the quiet man at the piano playing to an empty room at 3 a.m., whispering lyrics to the night. That's the Elvis I remember, the one who still believed in. Grace, there's a story I don't tell often. One of the sound engineers from that last show kept a copy of the fans' recording, that raw tape from Indianapolis. He digitized it years later and sent me a copy. I listened to it one night, headphones on, lights off. The crowd roared, the piano started, and there it was, that same voice, fragile but fearless. Halfway through the song, you can hear him take a deep breath, then say quietly, "Thank you." It's not in any official version, but it's there, faint, real, human, and every time I hear it, I feel the same thing. He wasn't thanking the audience, he was thanking the world, because somehow, despite everything and the chaos, the pain, the loneliness, he still believed in love, and he gave it back the only way he knew how. That's the echo that remains, not the fame, not the headlines, but the sound of a man who, for one brief moment, became pure music. People call him the king, but I think he'd laugh at that. He never wanted a crown, he wanted connection. He wanted to sing something that mattered, and in the end, he did. So when the rain falls in Memphis, when the radio crackles late at night, when some lonely kid sits down at a piano trying to find the right chord, that's where you'll find him. Not gone, not forgotten, just waiting between the notes.